Long before anyone gave the stars names, long before charts, symbols, or predictions existed, there was a quiet and unsettling feeling shared by nearly every human who ever lived. Imagine standing alone in the darkness, far from firelight, far from shelter. The world around you is silent except for wind brushing through tall grass. Above you stretches a sky, so vast it feels impossible to understand. Thousands of small, cold lights stare back, unmoving, unblinking. And in that moment, a question forms. Not in words, but in instinct. Are we being watched? This feeling did not come from logic. It came from vulnerability. Early humans lived at the mercy of forces they could not control. Storms arrived without warning. Animals hunted in the dark. Crops failed. People vanished. Death was common, and explanations were rare. When fear has no clear cause, the mind searches for patterns. And the sky, always present and impossibly distant, became the perfect place to project meaning. Night after night, the stars returned. They rose and fell in the same slow rhythms. Seasons changed when certain patterns appeared. Cold followed one arrangement of lights. Warmth followed another. Over time, these repetitions stopped feeling random. They began to feel intentional, as if something, somewhere beyond reach, was quietly turning the world like a wheel. At first, the stars were not friendly. They were not guides or companions. They were powerful, distant, and unknowable. To early humans, anything that could not be understood was often assumed to be alive. Rivers had moods, mountains slept, the wind whispered, and the sky, vast and endless, surely held beings greater than anything on earth. This belief did not emerge from superstition alone. It was reinforced by survival. Knowing when animals migrated, when rains would come, or when winter would end could mean the difference between life and death. The sky became a clock long, before clocks existed. But unlike a tool, it felt sacred, because no one controlled it. It simply was. As humans gathered in groups and stories replaced silence, the stars slowly gained personalities. A cluster of lights began to resemble a shape. That shape reminded someone of an animal, a tool, a figure from a story told around the fire. And once a story existed, it could be remembered. Once remembered, it could be shared. Over generations, these stories grew heavier, layered with meaning, memory, and fear. There is something deeply human about turning the unknown into narrative. When faced with chaos, we tell stories not to entertain ourselves, but to survive emotionally. A story gives shape to fear. It offers a beginning, a middle, and sometimes an ending. The night sky had no ending, but stories made it feel less endless. Slowly, almost without noticing, humans stopped simply looking at the stars. They began listening to them. When disaster struck, eyes lifted upward. When a child was born, the sky was consulted. When a king rose or fell, the stars were blamed or praised. The heavens became a silent witness to every human hope and regret. What is important to understand is that astrology did not begin as belief in personality traits or destiny. It began as a response to helplessness. When the world feels uncontrollable, humans search for order, and the stars, fixed yet moving, distant yet reliable, offered just enough structure to be comforting. Over centuries, this comfort turned into tradition. Traditions turned into systems. Systems turned into authority. Those who claimed to understand the sky gained influence. Priests, shamans, and rulers learned that interpretation could be power. If the stars spoke, someone had to translate their voice. But before power, before temples, before written records, there was simply awe, a quiet, almost painful awareness of smallness. The same awareness you might feel today if you step outside late at night, far from city lights, and let your eyes adjust. The sky does not rush. It does not respond. It simply exists, unchanged by human concern. This unchanging nature is what made the sky feel eternal. While generations lived and died, the stars remained. They became symbols of continuity in a fragile world. If everything else could disappear, perhaps the sky would remember. As humans began mapping patterns, they were not trying to predict the future. They were trying to understand the present. If a drought followed a certain arrangement of stars, that arrangement became a warning. If abundance followed another, it became a promise. Meaning grew slowly, shaped by memory rather than evidence. What we now call zodiac signs were once nothing more than markers along a vast circular path, a way to divide the infinite into something manageable, a way to say, here's where we are in the year, here is what usually comes next. Over time, symbols replaced measurements and stories replaced observation. And yet, even as astrology evolved, the emotional core never changed. Humans still looked up seeking reassurance, still wondered if suffering had purpose, still hoped that chaos followed a pattern, even if that pattern was beyond understanding. There's a strange comfort in believing that the universe is a rhythm, that events are not entirely random. Whether or not that belief is true has mattered less than how it feels. Astrology endured not because it was accurate, but because it was calming. Tonight, as you listen, you are participating in the same quiet tradition that began tens of thousands of years ago. You are not reading the sky for survival, but you are still listening to its stories. The fear may be softer now, the world more explained, but the questions remain surprisingly similar. Are we alone? Does any of this mean something? Is there a pattern beneath the noise? The stars, as always, do not answer. They remain distant, silent, and steady. And perhaps that is why we continue to return to them. Not because they explain everything, but because, in their silence, they allow us to rest. As the night deepens, the sky stays exactly where it has always been, waiting. Before symbols were carved into stone, and before stories were refined into myths, the night sky existed as a raw and unfiltered presence. There were no constellations yet, no heroic figures or sacred animals traced between distant points of light. There was only darkness scattered with fire. To the earliest humans, this sky was not something to be interpreted. It was something to endure. In a world without artificial light, night arrived suddenly and completely. The moment the sun slipped below the horizon, the land transformed. Familiar paths vanished. Sounds carried farther. Every shadow suggested danger. The sky above, however, did something strange. Instead of disappearing, it revealed itself more fully. The darkness did not hide the stars. It uncovered them. At first, these lights were not counted or named. They were simply there, constant yet unreachable. Some were brighter than others. Some moved slowly across the sky. Others appeared fixed, as if pinned to an invisible surface. Early humans noticed these differences not out of curiosity, but necessity. Movement meant change. Change meant consequence. Long before calendars or clocks, the sky became the most reliable reference point. Days passed, but the stars returned. Storms came and went, but the patterns above remained largely the same. Even when the ground beneath felt unpredictable, the sky followed rules that could be learned, even if they could not be explained. Over many lifetimes, humans began to notice subtle rhythms. Certain stars rose just before dawn at specific times of the year. Others vanished for months and then returned. The moon changed shape in a steady cycle, affecting tides, animals, and human behavior. These observations were not written down. They were remembered, repeated, and slowly refined through shared experience. Memory was humanity's first archive. Elders taught the young where to look, not why. A pointing hand toward the horizon carried more weight than explanation. Survival depended on paying attention, not understanding. In these early stages, the sky was not divided into sections. There was no zodiac wheel. Instead, it functioned as a vast dome of signals. When the air grew colder and certain stars appeared at dusk, it was time to prepare. When other lights returned to morning sky, it was time to move, hunt, or plant. The sky was a living schedule, but not yet a story. What's striking is how patient this process was. Thousands of years passed before humans felt the need to label what they saw. For a long time, looking was enough. Patterns existed whether or not they were named. Meaning did not need language to function. But eventually, something shifted. As humans settled into larger communities, memory alone became insufficient. Too many people, too many seasons, too many variables. Knowledge needed structure. Repetition demanded preservation. It was then that the sky began to change, not physically, but psychologically. Humans stopped seeing stars as individual lights and began grouping them together. The mind naturally seeks efficiency. A cluster becomes a shape becomes familiar. Familiarity becomes comfort. At first, these groupings were practical. A particular arrangement marked the arrival of winter. Another marked the time when rivers flooded or receded. These patterns were not imagined. They were functional. The imagination came later. Over time, practicality softened into symbolism. Once a pattern had been recognized enough times, it became safe to remember. Once it was safe, it could be given a name. And once it had a name, it could be taught. This is where the sky began to feel less threatening. What is named feels less powerful. What is understood feels less dangerous. Even when the understanding is incomplete, the act of naming creates a sense of control. Still, the sky remained mostly neutral. It did not reward or punish. It simply marked time. The idea that the heavens care about human affairs had not fully formed yet. That belief required a further step. The belief that patterns existed not just in seasons, but in fate. Before that step could occur, humans needed stories that extended beyond survival. They needed myths that explained not just when something would happen, but why. But in this earlier world, the sky did not speak. It observed. This era of stargazing was quiet. There were no temples aligned to stars, no charts predicting outcomes, just long nights and slow learning. The stars were companions in silence, not messengers. And yet, even in silence, they shaped behavior. Migration routes followed celestial markers. Navigation depended on fixed points above. Direction, one of humanity's most abstract concepts, was born from the sky. North was not invented on land. It was discovered overhead. As this knowledge accumulated, it created a subtle divide between those who watched closely and those who did not. Experience became authority. The sky rewarded patience. Those who observed carefully gained respect, not because they claimed power, but because they remembered correctly. Still, no one claimed ownership of the heavens. The sky belonged to everyone and no one. It was shared, constant, and indifferent. This indifference mattered. It kept belief from becoming worship. The stars were not gods yet. They were signals. Only later, when humans began asking questions that had no practical answers, questions about death, suffering, and purpose, did the sky take on a deeper role. But that transformation required time, culture, and imagination. For now, the stars remain markers of rhythm rather than meaning. There is something almost peaceful about this stage of human history, a time when looking up did not come with expectations, when the sky did not promise anything, nor threaten anything. It simply marked the passage of life. In many ways, this is the calmest relationship humans have ever had with the stars. No predictions, no destiny, just observation. As the night deepens, you can imagine this version of the sky, empty of symbols, free of interpretation, a vast canvas without labels. The same stars you see today, but without stories attached. And in that simplicity, there is rest. But humans do not remain in simplicity forever. Curiosity grows. Stories form. Meaning accumulates. The sky, unchanged, waits for the next layer of human imagination to settle upon it. As humans began to settle near rivers and fertile land, the sky slowly shifted from being a passive observer to something far more deliberate. In the wide valleys between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, where agriculture replaced wandering and cities replaced camps, people noticed something unsettling. The land could be worked, controlled, and shaped, but the sky could not. And yet, the sky seemed to influence everything that mattered. Floods arrived with terrifying precision. Droughts lingered longer than expected. Crops flourished one year and failed the next. In a world that now depended on timing, unpredictability became dangerous. Survival was no longer just about strength or speed. It was about knowing when. This was where Mesopotamia changed humanity's relationship with the heavens forever. The priests and scholars of these early cities began to watch the sky with an intensity never seen before, not out of wonder, but out of responsibility. If the gods controlled the universe, and the sky reflected their will, then failing to observe it was a failure of duty. The heavens were no longer neutral. They were intentional. In Mesopotamian belief, the universe was structured. Chaos existed, but it was governed by higher forces. The gods were not distant abstractions. They were present, powerful, and deeply involved in human affairs. The sky became their written language, a vast tablet etched with signs that could be read by those trained to see them. This idea introduced a profound psychological shift. If the sky contained messages, then events on Earth were not random. Disasters were not meaningless. Success was not accidental. Everything was connected, woven into a cosmic order that humans could partially understand. And partial understanding was enough to create authority. Those who studied the stars were no longer just observers. They became interpreters. They stood between the gods and the people, translating celestial movement into earthly warning. When an eclipse darkened the sky, it was not merely a shadow, it was a signal. When a planet moved backward, it was not coincidence. It was disruption. These interpretations were carefully recorded on clay tablets, marking one of the earliest attempts to preserve cosmic knowledge. Over generations, patterns were cataloged. Certain celestial events were linked to specific outcomes, not because they always occurred, but because memory favored correlation over contradiction. If disaster followed a strange alignment once, it was remembered forever. If nothing happened the next time, silence erased it. This was not deception. It was human nature. The Mesopotamians divided the sky into sections, assigning meaning to each area. Not personalities yet, but domains, regions of influence. The heavens became a map of power, and Earth was its reflection. Kings paid close attention to these interpretations. Rulership was believed to be divinely sanctioned, but also divinely fragile. A bad omen could mean rebellion, invasion, or death. To protect themselves, rulers relied on astrologer priests to read the sky and advise action. In some cases, this reliance became extreme. When omens predicted danger to a king, a substitute ruler would be placed on the throne temporarily, a symbolic sacrifice meant to deceive fate. The real king would hide, waiting for the danger to pass. When it did, the substitute was quietly removed. This practice reveals something deeply human. Astrology was not just belief, it was fear management, a way to negotiate with an uncontrollable universe. The sky, in this system, was both threat and reassurance. It warned of danger, but also offered a sense of predictability. If signs could be read, then disaster could be prepared for. Control did not need to be complete. It only needed to feel possible. Over time, the Mesopotamians refined their system. They began focusing on a specific band of the sky, where the sun, moon, and planets traveled. This pathway became central, not because it was mystical, but because it was consistent. Movement repeated itself there. Repetition invited structure. That structure eventually became the foundation of what we now call the zodiac. But at this stage, the zodiac was not symbolic. It was administrative, a way to organize time, ritual, and power. Each segment of the sky was associated with gods, cities, and outcomes. The heavens mirrored the political and religious hierarchy of Earth. What mattered most was order. Chaos was terrifying. Order was divine. Astrology offered a framework that made suffering bearable. If misfortune had a cosmic cause, it was less personal, less random, less cruel. Humans could endure hardship more easily if it felt meaningful. This belief softened anxiety and reinforced obedience. If gods ruled through the sky, then questioning authority became questioning the universe itself. Yet, despite its power, Mesopotamian astrology remained cautious. It did not claim to know individual destinies. It focused on collective fate, cities, kings, nations. The individual mattered only as part of the whole. Personality astrology did not exist yet. The sky did not care who you were. It cared where you were in time. Still, something important had begun. The idea that the cosmos had intention, that patterns above reflected life below, that existence followed rules beyond human creation. This idea would travel far beyond Mesopotamia. It would be reshaped, softened, and mythologized, but its core would remain intact. The belief that the universe speaks, quietly, indirectly, and only to those willing to watch. As the centuries passed, The sky continued its steady motion, indifferent to interpretation. Empires rose and fell beneath it. Tablets cracked and cities vanished. But the patterns remained, waiting to be rediscovered. By the time humans began dividing the sky into recognizable segments, something subtle but important had already happened. Astrology had not yet become personal, symbolic, or mystical in the way it is often understood today. It was, at its core, a system of timekeeping, a way to track the passing of seasons with more precision than memory alone could offer. In ancient societies, especially those dependent on agriculture, knowing when mattered more than knowing why. Seeds planted too early froze in the soil. Crops planted too late withered under heat. Festivals tied communities together, but only if they occurred at the right moment. The sky offered consistency where the land could not. The path followed by the sun across a year became the most important celestial reference. This invisible road, later called ecliptic, was not sacred at first. It was useful. The sun's position told people where they were in the cycle of life. Birth, growth, harvest, decline, and rest followed its movement with remarkable reliability. To manage this cycle, the sky was divided into equal sections, not because of symbolism, but because division made complexity manageable. A circle divided into parts could be remembered, taught, and corrected. It allowed people to say, "We are here," rather than guessing blindly. These sections became markers, not identities. When the sun entered a certain region of the sky, it meant something practical. Rains were coming. Animals would mate. Rivers would swell. This knowledge was shared communally, passed down through generations not as belief, but as instruction. What we now call zodiac signs were originally seasonal indicators. Their power lay in predictability, not mystery. This distinction is important, because modern astrology often blurs a line between origin and interpretation. In the beginning, the zodiac was not about personality. It was about survival. Each segment of the sky was associated with activities, not traits. Work intensified or slowed. Rituals began or ended. The rhythm of life aligned with the rhythm of the heavens. There was comfort in this alignment. When life follows a pattern, anxiety softens. Even hardship becomes easier to bear when it fits within an expected cycle. Winter is harsh, but it ends. Summer is abundant, but it fades. The sky reinforced this truth year after year. This cyclical worldview shaped how ancient people understood existence. Time was not linear. It did not move toward a final conclusion. It looped, returned, repeated. The sky never rushed, and neither did history. In this mindset, the zodiac functioned as a wheel rather than a path, one that turned endlessly, indifferent to human ambition. This perspective reduced fear of endings, because every ending implied a beginning. Only later did symbolism begin to attach itself to these divisions. Once a section of the sky became familiar, it invited story, and once story entered, meaning deepened. But even then, the zodiac remained anchored to the seasons. Symbols were chosen because they reflected what was happening on Earth at that time of year. Animals giving birth, fields being plowed, crops ripening, life responding to climate. This is why early zodiac imagery often feels grounded and physical. It emerged from observation, not imagination. The sky reflected the land, not the other way around. As civilizations exchanged knowledge, these divisions spread. The names and symbols changed, but the structure remained. 12 segments, each tied to a phase of the year. A shared understanding that time could be divided and understood through the heavens. What mattered was not accuracy in the modern sense. What mattered was consistency. The system did not need to be perfect. It needed to be stable. And it was. For centuries, this calendar guided human activity with remarkable effectiveness. It told farmers when to prepare, priests when to perform rituals, and rulers when to act. The sky was not consulted for personal advice. It was respected as a clock too large to fail. This practical foundation is often forgotten when astrology is reduced to entertainment. But without it, astrology would never have survived. It endured because it worked, at least well enough to justify its place in daily life. Only when societies became more complex did the zodiac begin to shift from collective timing to individual meaning. As survival became less immediate, curiosity turned inward. Humans began asking not just what would happen, but who they were within the cycle. But that transformation required centuries of philosophical development. At this stage, the zodiac remained impersonal. It did not judge. It did not describe character. It simply marked position. There is something deeply calming about this version of astrology. No predictions, no expectations, just gentle movement through time. The sun rises, the sun sets, the year turns, and as long as the sky continues its quiet rotation, life below finds its rhythm. Even now, beneath layers of interpretation and belief, that original function remains. A reminder that before astrology tried to explain the human soul, it helped humans survive the year. A simple wheel, turning slowly, carrying life forward without asking who we are, only where we are in time. At some point, practicality was no longer enough. The sky could mark time, but it could not explain fear. It could tell people when the seasons would change, but not why the world felt alive, unpredictable, and sometimes cruel. As human imagination deepened, the need for symbolism grew stronger, and it was animals more than anything else that humans trusted to carry meaning into the heavens. Animals were already woven into every aspect of early life. They were hunted, feared, worshipped, depended upon. They represented danger and nourishment, chaos and stability. Unlike the distant stars, animals were immediate and understood through experience. When humans looked up and tried to interpret the unfamiliar, they reached for what felt familiar. This is why the sky did not fill with abstract shapes or tools. It filled with living forms. An animal symbol was not decoration. It was translation, a way to bring the unreachable closer. If the sky moved with intention, then it must move like something alive. And nothing alive was better understood than animals. Predators embodied power and fear. Grazing animals symbolized abundance and patience. Birds represented movement between worlds, touching both earth and sky. These associations were not taught, they were felt. They emerged naturally from daily survival. When early sky watchers grouped stars into shapes, they were not forcing imagination onto randomness. They were recognizing patterns that resonated emotionally. A curve of light suggested horns. A line resembled a tail. Once a resemblance was noticed, it became impossible to unsee. And once it was seen, it gained meaning. The sky became a reflection of a natural world, arranged above as it was below. This mirrored relationship reinforced a belief that everything was connected. What happened on earth echoed in the heavens. What appeared in the heavens influenced the earth. Animals also offered moral simplicity. They were not complicated. They acted according to instinct. Their behavior felt honest. In a world full of uncertainty, this honesty was comforting. If the universe spoke through animals, then its language was instinctual rather than deceptive. This made animal symbolism powerful and accessible. A child could understand a lion's strength or a bull's endurance without explanation. Meaning did not require literacy or formal education. It could be felt immediately. Over time, animal symbols attached themselves to specific regions of the sky that already marked important seasonal changes. These were not random choices. A sign associated with planting might be represented by an animal known for fertility or strength. A sign marking transition might be represented by a creature known for movement or duality. This alignment deepened the system's emotional logic. The sky no longer just told time. It told a story about life itself. There was also an element of fear woven into this symbolism. Animals were not just companions. They were threats. Wolves hunted at night. Bulls could kill. Snakes struck without warning. By placing these creatures in the sky, humans elevated them beyond immediate danger. They became controlled, predictable, and distant. This psychological shift mattered. Fear loses some of its power when it is ritualized. When danger is placed in the heavens, it feels less capable of reaching you in the dark. Animals also represented forces beyond human control. Weather, fertility, disease, and death often appeared suddenly and vanished without explanation. These forces felt animalistic, wild, instinct-driven, indifferent. Using animals to symbolize them felt honest. The zodiac, as it slowly took shape, became a gallery of these forces, not gentle companions, but reminders of the world's power. Each sign held both comfort and warning. It is important to remember that early humans did not romanticize animals the way modern culture often does. Animals were not pets or symbols of peace. They were equals in survival, sometimes superior. Respect for them came from danger, not sentiment. Placing animals in the sky was an act of reverence, not imagination. As civilizations grew more complex, these symbols became standardized. Stories were added. Myths explained how the animals came to the heavens. Gods were linked to them, but the emotional foundation remained unchanged. The sky became a living landscape populated by familiar forces. When humans looked up, they did not see emptiness. They saw movement, presence, and intention. This made the night less lonely. There is a subtle comfort in believing that the universe shares your instincts, that it understands hunger, fear, growth, and rest. Animal symbolism offered that comfort without explanation. It allowed humans to feel connected rather than insignificant. Even today, when we speak of zodiac signs, animal imagery still carries the strongest emotional impact. A ram feels different from a bull. Twins feel different from a fish. These feelings are immediate, instinctive, and largely unconscious. That is not coincidence. It is inheritance. We are responding to symbols shaped by fear, survival, and familiarity. Symbols chosen not for beauty, but for resonance. As the zodiac continued to evolve, animals will remain its backbone. Even as philosophy layered complexity on top, the core language stayed instinctual. Because before humans trusted logic, they trusted what felt alive. And the sky, filled with animals, finally felt like something that could be understood, even if only in fragments. As you let your thoughts slow, imagine that ancient sky, not as a chart, but as a living field. Creatures resting above the world, watching silently as life unfolds below. The fear is distant now. The rhythm remains. And the animals, etched in light, continue their endless watch. Long before Aries became associated with personality, ambition, or leadership, it existed as something far quieter and far older. It was not a symbol of action yet. It was a marker of return, a gentle but powerful signal that something dormant was waking again. In the earliest skies observed by ancient civilizations, the stars we now associate with Aries rose at a moment of deep importance. Winter was loosening its grip. The harshness of cold and scarcity was slowly retreating. The land, exhausted but alive, was preparing to breathe again. This timing mattered more than symbolism ever could. For early agricultural societies, this period of the year carried tension. Hope and fear existed side by side. Seeds had to be planted without certainty. The ground might still freeze. Rains might fail. And yet, action was unavoidable. Waiting too long meant missing the narrow window of survival. Aries emerged from this uncertainty. Before it was a ram, this region of the sky was simply associated with beginnings. Not joyful beginnings, but risky ones. The kind that require courage without guarantee. This is why the energy later attributed to Aries feels sharp and urgent. It was born from necessity. In some of the earliest Mesopotamian star lists, this area of the sky was linked not to an animal at all, but to labor and transition. It marked a moment when humans were forced to move from endurance to effort. Survival shifted from waiting to doing. The animal association came later, and when it did, it was not chosen lightly. The ram was not selected for gentleness. It was selected for its role in sacrifice, strength, and reproduction. Rams were tied to fertility, blood, and renewal, concepts that perfectly mirrored the season Aries represented. Blood, in particular, held deep meaning. It was life itself, visible and immediate. Sacrifice was not symbolic theater. It was survival ritual. Offering blood to gods was believed to ensure balance, favor, and continuation. The ram became a bridge between death and life. When Aries finally took shape as a constellation, it carried this weight with it. It was not about identity. It was about responsibility. Spring demanded action, whether one felt ready or not. Fields had to be plowed, animals bred, communities mobilized. Aries marked this unavoidable push forward. Over time, myths began to gather around this symbol. Stories spoke of divine rams with golden fleece, of rescue and reward, of trials overcome through bold movement. These myths did not invent Aries' meaning. They dressed it in narrative. What remained consistent was the association with beginnings that are not gentle. Unlike later signs associated with stability or reflection, Aries was tied to momentum, to crossing thresholds, to stepping into uncertainty without reassurance. This is why Aries' energy, even today, feels restless. It is rooted in the anxiety of early spring, the tension between potential and failure. It is also why Aries is often misunderstood. Modern interpretations focus on aggression or dominance, but those are shallow echoes of something deeper. Aries is not about conquest. It is about initiation, about taking the first step when still afraid. In ancient cultures, the arrival of this season was often marked by festivals, rituals, and offerings. These were not celebrations of joy. They were acknowledgments of risk. Communities gathered not to relax, but to align themselves with the cycle. The ram stood at the center of these rituals because it embodied readiness. It did not wait. It charged forward, driven by instinct rather than strategy. This instinct was respected. In a world where hesitation could mean starvation, decisiveness was survival. As astrology traveled and evolved, this meaning adapted to new contexts. In Greece, Aries became associated with heroic journeys and divine favor. In later interpretations, it became linked to individual will and identity. But beneath all of this, the original meaning remained intact. Aries marked the moment when life could no longer remain passive. It is important to understand that this sign did not emerge from optimism. It emerged from pressure. The pressure of seasons, scarcity, and responsibility. Even the symbol of the ram's horns carries this tension, curved, ready to strike, but also protective. They are not ornamental, they are functional. In early astrology, Aries did not promise success. It demanded effort. The future was uncertain, but inaction guaranteed failure. This emotional foundation is what gives Aries its enduring presence. Even when stripped of context, it still feels like movement, like urgency, like the beginning of something that cannot be delayed. As you imagine this ancient sky, picture the stars rising not as decoration, but as warning and invitation. Winter is ending. There is no time to rest. Life is returning, and it requires participation. Aries did not ask who you were. It asked whether you were ready to begin. And in that quiet, inevitable question, the ram took its place among the stars, forever marking the moment when survival turned into action and waiting gave way to courage. Once the ram had taken its place in the sky, its meaning began to deepen in ways that went far beyond season and survival. What had started as a simple marker of renewal slowly became something heavier, more emotional, and more symbolic. The ram was no longer just a signal that life was returning. It became a reminder that life, to continue, often demanded something in return. In many early societies, sacrifice was not an abstract idea. It was visible, physical, and necessary. Food did not appear without death. Survival required loss. The ram, strong and fertile, represented abundance, but abundance was never free. Blood sealed the agreement between humans and the unseen forces they believed governed the world. When spring arrived, it was not greeted with certainty. It was greeted with caution. People understood that the season could fail them just as easily as it could save them. Sacrifice became a way to negotiate with uncertainty, and the ram stood at the center of that negotiation. Across cultures separated by distance and language, the ram appears again and again in ritual contexts. In Mesopotamia, rams were offered to appease gods associated with weather and fertility. In ancient Egypt, the ram was linked to creative power and divine authority. Its horns symbolized life force, curling outward like the unfolding of existence itself. These associations were not coincidental. The ram embodied contradiction. It was gentle when grazing, violent when threatened. It could create life, but also take it. This dual nature made it a perfect symbol for the precarious balance humans felt at the start of the year. The act of sacrifice itself was deeply psychological. It transformed fear into action. By choosing to give something valuable, humans felt less helpless. Even if the gods remained silent, the ritual created the illusion of dialogue. Aries absorbed this emotional weight. The sign became less about timing and more about offering. Not offering in the sense of generosity, but in the sense of surrender. Something must be given up so that something else may continue. This theme echoed through myth. Stories of divine rams often revolve around rescue, escape, or transformation, but always at a cost. The golden ram that saved Phrixus and Helle did not remain. It was sacrificed, its fleece becoming an object of obsession and conflict. Salvation led directly into sacrifice, and sacrifice led into endless struggle. These myths were not meant to comfort. They were meant to reflect reality. Life moved forward through loss. Progress required risk. Growth demanded endings. Even the position of Aries at the beginning of the zodiac reinforces this truth. Beginnings are rarely clean. They are messy, uncertain, and often painful. Something old must die for something new to emerge. In ritual calendars, Aries often marked periods when leaders were judged, when offerings were made, and when balance was restored. The sign was associated not just with action, but with accountability. What had been done in the previous cycle mattered. Consequences arrived with the new season. This gave Aries a moral dimension. It was not reckless. It was decisive. Action taken under Aries was not impulsive. It was necessary. Over time, this meaning softened as societies grew more stable. Sacrifice became symbolic rather than literal. Blood was replaced by prayer, ceremony, or abstention. But the underlying idea remained. To begin anything meaningful, something must be risked. This is why Aries energy still carries an edge. It is not comfortable. It does not promise safety. It asks for commitment without guarantee. This is a legacy of sacrifice. The ram's horns, often depicted prominently, became symbols of both power and offering. They curved like cycles, reminding viewers that beginnings always return to endings. What is started must eventually be completed, consumed, or transformed. In ancient art, rams were often shown in positions of alertness. Head raised, body tense. Ready? This posture mirrors the psychological state of early spring, hope sharpened by anxiety. Even when Aries became personalized in later astrology, this tension remained embedded within it. The sign was never passive. It did not wait for permission. It acted because delay was dangerous. In this sense, Aries represents a human response to uncertainty. When faced with risk, some freeze. Others move forward. Aries honors a second response, not because it is always right, but because it is unavoidable. As the zodiac evolved and spread, cultures adapted the ram symbolism to fit their beliefs. But the core narrative remained remarkably consistent. Aries was the gate, the threshold, the moment when comfort ends and effort begins. This is why Aries feels loud compared to other signs. It carries the echo of drums, chants, and ritual fire, the sound of hooves on stone, the sharp smell of blood and smoke at dawn. Yet beneath this intensity lies something quiet and human, the understanding that life does not continue on its own. It requires participation. It requires offering. As you imagine this ancient sky, see the ram not as a symbol of dominance, but as a signal of responsibility, a reminder that renewal is not passive. It is earned. The stars did not demand sacrifice. Humans did, because sacrifice gave shape to fear and direction to hope. And so the ram remains, forever poised at the beginning, holding the memory of what it cost to begin again. After the sharp urgency of Aries, the rhythm of the year begins to slow. The frantic energy of initiation gives way to something heavier, steadier, and more deliberate. This is where Taurus enters, not as a sudden force, but as a settling one. Where Aries asked for action, Taurus asked for patience. Where Aries demanded risk, Taurus promised endurance. In the ancient world, this transition mattered deeply. The most dangerous moment had passed. Seeds were in the ground. The decision to act had already been made. Now came the long wait. This waiting was not passive. It was labor. It was vigilance. It was trust and effort already spent. Taurus emerged from this emotional landscape. The bull was not chosen because it was beautiful or gentle. It was chosen because it represented weight, strength, and reliability. Bulls pulled plows. Bulls fertilized herds. Bulls stood their ground when challenged. In a world where stability meant survival, The bull became sacred. Unlike the ram, which symbolized movement and urgency, the bull symbolized presence. It did not rush. It endured. It absorbed pressure rather than releasing it. This quality made it the perfect symbol for the season that followed the first burst of spring. Agricultural societies understood this deeply. After planting came maintenance. Fields had to be protected. Animals had to be fed. Structures had to be repaired. Growth did not happen all at once. It happened slowly, quietly, often invisibly. Taurus marked this phase. The bull also represented abundance, but not in a sudden or explosive way. It represented stored value, food in granaries, wealth in livestock, security built over time. This is why Taurus became associated with ownership and territory, not greed, but responsibility. To own land or animals meant to protect them. To protect them meant to commit to the future. The bull symbolized that commitment. Across cultures, bulls were revered as embodiments of Earth itself. Their size and strength mirrored the land's ability to sustain life. In many myths, the bull is not a servant of humans, but an equal force. It resists domination. It demands respect. This relationship shaped how Taurus was understood. It was not a sign of submission. It was a sign of balance between effort and reward. The bull worked, but it was also honored. It gave, but it also took space. In rituals tied to this time of year, emphasis shifted from sacrifice to preservation. Offerings were made not to initiate life, but to protect it. The fear was no longer whether things would begin, but whether they would last. Taurus held this anxiety. There is a psychological comfort in stability. Once survival feels less immediate, the human mind seeks safety. Routine becomes reassuring. Predictability becomes valuable. Taurus embodied this desire to hold on. This is why Taurus energy feels grounded. It is rooted in the body rather than the mind. It values touch, rest, nourishment, and physical presence. These qualities were not indulgences in ancient times. They were necessities. The land demanded attention. Animals required care. Structures needed maintenance. Taurus energy honored the slow, repetitive work that kept communities alive. This made Taurus deeply respected. Without it, the burst of Aries would collapse into chaos. Initiation without endurance leads to exhaustion. Taurus provided the counterbalance. In mythology, bulls often appear as guardians or tests of strength. They are not villains. They are obstacles meant to be faced with respect. Conquering a bull was never about destruction. It was about proving worth. This idea carried into astrology. Taurus did not represent conflict for its own sake. It represented resistance that revealed intention. If something could endure Taurus, it was worth keeping. Even the bull's stubbornness carries meaning. It reflects a land's refusal to change quickly. Seasons cannot be rushed. Growth cannot be forced. Taurus reminds humans of limits. As astrology evolved, these qualities were personalized. Taurus became associated with comfort, loyalty, and attachment. But beneath these interpretations lies something older and more serious. Taurus is about preservation. It asks a simple but heavy question. Now that life has begun, how will you protect it? In ancient times, failing to honor this phase meant starvation. Crops neglected would fail. Animals mistreated would die. Structures left unattended would collapse. Stability was not optional. It was survival. The bull became the sky's reminder of this truth. As the zodiac spread and absorbed new cultural layers, Taurus retained its earthy weight. Even in artistic depictions, the bull is often shown grounded, powerful, unmoving. It does not chase. It waits. This waiting is not laziness. It is trust in time. The transition from Aries to Taurus mirrors a fundamental human shift, from impulse to intention, from desire to responsibility, from movement to maintenance. This contrast gives the zodiac its rhythm. Without Taurus, the cycle would burn itself out. As you imagine this ancient season, feel the slowing of pace. The sun climbs higher. Days lengthen. Work becomes steady rather than frantic. The earth warms, and life begins to settle into form. The bull stands firm beneath the stars, reminding those below that growth is not dramatic. It is quiet, heavy, and patient. And in that patience, life learns how to last. As Taurus settled into human consciousness, the bull's presence in the sky began to echo far beyond agriculture. What started as a practical symbol of strength and stability slowly expanded into something sacred, political, and deeply emotional. Across civilizations that never met and never shared language, the bull appeared again and again, not as coincidence, but as necessity. In Mesopotamia, the bull was already a creature of power before it reached the stars. It pulled the plow, sustained families, and represented wealth. To own cattle was to possess security. Naturally, this value extended into religion. The bull became a symbol of divine strength, often linked to storm gods whose power shaped the land itself. When thunder rolled and rain followed, crops grew. The connection felt immediate and undeniable. The bull, associated with thunder through its sound and force, became an earthly reflection of these gods. Strength from above mirrored strength below. In ancient Egypt, the bull took on an even more intimate role. The Apis bull was not merely symbolic, it was divine. Chosen by specific markings, the Apis bull lived among priests, worshipped as a manifestation of sacred power. Its movements were observed. Its health was monitored. Its death marked mourning across the land. This relationship reveals something important. The bull was not distant. It lived among humans. It breathed, ate, and aged. Divine power was not imagined as abstract. It was embodied. This embodiment mattered. It made the sacred tangible. It allowed humans to touch what they believed ruled them. When the Apis bull died, it was mourned not just as an animal, but as a god. And when new bull was chosen, the cycle continued. Death did not end divinity. It renewed it. This belief aligned perfectly with Taurus seasonal meaning. Stability did not mean permanence. It meant continuity through change. In the Mediterranean world, the bull became central to some of the most haunting myths. In Crete, the Minotaur, half man, half bull, represented a darker interpretation of strength, power unbalanced by restraint, instinct unchecked by wisdom. The labyrinth that housed the Minotaur symbolized complexity, confusion, and the danger of being trapped by one's own creations. The bull here was no longer purely sacred. It was dangerous. Yet even in this form, it commanded respect. This duality followed the bull everywhere. It could nurture or destroy, sustain or dominate. The lesson was clear. Stability without awareness could become stagnation or tyranny. In astrology, this tension quietly embedded itself within Taurus. The sign became associated not just with comfort, but with resistance to change. A reminder that holding on too tightly could be as harmful as letting go too quickly. In the ancient Near East, bull imagery adorned temples and gates. Massive stone bulls guarded entrances, their size meant to intimidate and protect. These were not decorations. They were psychological tools. Entering a city under the gaze of a bull reminded visitors of authority and endurance. Power wanted to appear immovable. The bull provided that image. As astrology traveled into Greek thought, the bull was woven into stories of desire and transformation. Zeus, king of the gods, took the form of bull to carry Europa across the sea. In this myth, the bull becomes a vehicle for change. Calm on the surface, unstoppable beneath. This story reveals another layer of Taurus symbolism. The bull may appear passive, but its strength is always present. Change does not require chaos. It can arrive slowly, quietly, and still reshape everything. These myths soften Taurus' image without removing its weight. The bull became not just a guardian of stability, but a carrier of transition. What ties all these interpretations together is trust. Humans trusted the bull's strength. They trusted its endurance. They trusted that if something could survive, it would endure like a bull. This trust extended into the heavens. When Taurus took its place among the stars, it carried the accumulated meaning of centuries. The sky became a museum of human experience, with the bull standing as one of its oldest exhibits. Astrology absorbed this richness. Taurus was no longer just a season. It was a worldview, one that valued persistence over speed, presence over ambition, and continuity over conquest. In times of upheaval, people turned toward Taurus symbolism for reassurance. If the bull remained in the sky, perhaps stability remained possible on Earth. Even today, the bull evokes a deep, almost instinctive response. It feels solid, reliable, difficult to move. This feeling is not taught, it is inherited. It comes from generations who depended on the bull for survival, worshipped it as sacred, and feared its power when unbalanced. The zodiac preserved this memory. As you imagine these ancient civilizations looking up at the same stars, consider how many lives were shaped beneath Taurus gaze, how many prayers were whispered, how many offerings made, how many fears eased by the belief that endurance was possible. The bull does not promise safety. It promises strength enough to remain standing. And in a world that has always changed faster than humans wish, that promise has been enough to keep Taurus alive in the sky, long after the temples fell and the rituals faded. The bull remains steady and silent, holding the weight of human trust across time. As the season carried forward under the quiet watch of the bull, something deeper than physical stability began to take hold. Time itself seemed to slow. The frantic uncertainty of early spring had passed, and in its place came a long stretch of waiting, tending, and trusting. This was the phase where effort faded into patience, and patience became endurance. Taurus was no longer just about the land beneath one's feet. It became about the weight of time. In ancient societies, this part of the year tested more than strength. It tested resolve. Once seeds were planted and structures secured, there was little left to do but continue. Days lengthened. Work became repetitive. Progress was subtle, sometimes invisible. Faith shifted from action to persistence. This was a difficult psychological transition. Humans are drawn to moments of change because they are dramatic. Maintenance, by contrast, is quiet and thankless. Taurus honored this quiet work. The bull, massive and slow-moving, reflected this reality. It did not rush. It did not adapt quickly. It endured. Its power lay in its ability to carry weight without complaint. This made it a perfect symbol for the passage of time itself. Steady, unstoppable, indifferent to human impatience. In this sense, Taurus represented the acceptance of limitation. You could not force crops to grow faster. You could not rush seasons forward. You could only wait, tend, and hope. This acceptance shaped ancient worldviews profoundly. Time was not an enemy to be conquered. It was a force to be respected. Taurus embodied that respect. Many early calendars emphasized this period as one of vigilance rather than celebration. Festivals quieted. Rituals focused on protection rather than invocation. The fear was no longer about beginnings, but about loss through neglect or decay. This fear was subtle but persistent. A single misstep could undo months of effort. Animals could fall ill. Weather could turn. The land could fail without warning. Taurus held this tension. This is why the sign became associated with patience and stubbornness. Stubbornness, in this context, was not resistance for its own sake. It was refusal to abandon what had already been invested. When survival depended on consistency, change felt dangerous. The bull standing its ground was not being defiant. It was protecting the future. Over time, this relationship between Taurus and time deepened into philosophy. In later cultures, Taurus became linked to ideas of permanence, memory, and legacy. What lasts matters more than what excites. This philosophy influenced architecture, law, and tradition. Structures were built to endure. Customs were preserved across generations. Stability became virtue. Astrology absorbed this belief quietly. Taurus was no longer just a seasonal marker. It was a reminder that life unfolds slowly, whether we accept it or not. The earth itself taught this lesson. Soil formed over centuries. Stones weathered over millennia. Human lives, brief by comparison, found meaning in continuity rather than speed. This perspective offered comfort. If everything moves slowly, then mistakes are not always fatal. Time allows repair. Growth does not demand urgency. Yet this comfort came with cost. Those who resisted change too long risked stagnation. Taurus energy, when unbalanced, could become immobile. The bull that refuses to move becomes trapped. Ancient myths reflected this danger. Stories warn of kings who clung to power too tightly, of societies that refused adaptation and fell. Taurus held both wisdom and warning. The sky, as always, mirrored this duality. Taurus rose predictably, reminding humans that time does not bend to desire. Seasons arrive whether or not one is ready. This inevitability shaped how people understood fate, not as a dramatic force, but as a slow current. You could swim with it or resist it, but you could not stop it. Taurus encouraged alignment rather than struggle. If you accept time's weight, you conserve energy. If you fight it, you exhaust yourself. This idea softened fear. Death itself became part of the cycle rather than an abrupt end. What dies returns in another form. What ends gives rise to continuation. This belief did not erase grief, but it gave it context. In the quiet hours of long days, humans learned to measure progress differently, not in leaps, but in accumulation, not in change, but in preservation. This is why Taurus remains associated with material reality. Food, shelter, touch, rest. These are not luxuries. They are anchors. They ground life in the present while time moves forward. As astrology evolved into personal interpretation, Taurus inherited this grounding role. It became the sign that reminds others to slow down, to value what is already built. But beneath modern traits lies something older and heavier. Taurus is the weight of existence itself, the part of life where nothing dramatic happens, but everything meaningful is maintained. As you imagine this ancient season, feel the sun steady in the sky, hear the quiet repetition of work, sense the passage of days not as loss, but as accumulation. The bull remains unmoved, carrying the memory of time not as urgency, but as endurance. And in that endurance, life finds the strength to continue. As the weight of Taurus slowly lifts, something subtle begins to change in the air. The land is stable now. Growth is underway. Survival no longer demands constant physical effort. And in this quiet space, the human mind begins to wander. Attention drifts outward and inward at the same time. Curiosity returns. Questions form. This is where Gemini begins, not with faces, not with voices, but with division. Before twins were imagined in the sky, Gemini existed as an idea rather than an image. It marked a shift away from the earth and toward perception. The world no longer needed to be held together by strength alone. It needed to be understood, explained, and shared. This moment in the seasonal cycle is psychologically important. Once food is growing and stability is established, humans gain mental space. The urgency of survival fades just enough to allow thought beyond necessity. This is when language expands. Stories grow longer and connections multiply. Gemini emerged from this expansion. Early observers of the sky noticed that this region did not represent a single force, but a pairing, two bright stars close together, 2 points that moved in relation to each other. They were not identical, but they were inseparable. This pairing felt different from the singular power of Aries or the solid presence of Taurus. It suggested relationship. Before Gemini became twins, it symbolized contrast, light and shadow, day and night, sound and silence. The mind began to recognize that the world was not made of single truths, but opposing ones. This realization was both liberating and unsettling. Duality meant choice. Choice meant uncertainty. Once the world could be seen from more than one angle, certainty became fragile. Gemini reflected this tension. In early thought systems, duality often appeared as balance rather than conflict. Hot and cold, wet and dry, male and female. These were not enemies, but complements. Together, they formed wholeness. Gemini's placement in the sky mirrored this balance. It did not dominate. It connected. It bridged. As societies became more complex, this symbolic duality took on social meaning. Humans began to live not just with nature, but with each other. Cooperation required communication. Communication required understanding difference. Gemini became associated with exchange. Trade routes expanded during this time of year. Travel became safer. People moved between settlements. Ideas spread. Languages mixed. The world felt larger and more connected. The sky reflected this expansion through Gemini's symbolism. It was not rooted in place like Taurus. It moved. It shifted. It adapted. This mobility was mental as much as physical. Gemini marked a moment when thought became flexible, where one could hold two ideas at once. where contradiction did not break meaning, but enriched it. However, this flexibility came with cost. A mind capable of seeing multiple perspectives could also become restless. Doubt crept in. Certainty weakened. Stability, once grounded in the earth, now floated in the mind. Ancient cultures felt this shift deeply. Knowledge was power, but too much knowledge could destabilize belief. Stories changed. Traditions were questioned. New ideas challenged old ones. Gemini embodied this tension between curiosity and chaos. This is why the sign was not immediately personified. It took time before humans felt comfortable assigning faces to this force. Duality, without form, is unsettling. Giving it human shape made it easier to understand. When twins finally emerged as Gemini's symbol, they were not identical. They represented difference within unity. Shared origin, separate paths. This symbolism resonated because it reflected human experience. Every person carries multiple selves, thought and feeling, desire and fear, logic and instinct. Gemini did not create this complexity. It named it. In myth, twins often appear as messengers, tricksters, or mediators. They move between worlds. They speak multiple languages. They understand contradictions. This role aligned perfectly with Gemini's place in the zodiac. Positioned after stability, it introduced motion without chaos, thought without collapse. But it also carried warning. Too much movement could lead to fragmentation. Too much thought could paralyze action. Ancient interpretations of Gemini often reflected this caution. The sign was respected, but not fully trusted. Knowledge could enlighten, but it could also deceive. This ambivalence remains embedded in Gemini's symbolism. It is neither good nor bad. It is dynamic. As astrology spread, Gemini became associated with air rather than earth or fire. Air cannot be held. It moves freely. It carries sound, scent, and breath. Without it, life ends. But too much wind destroys. This element captured Gemini's essence perfectly. The mind, like air, is invisible yet powerful. It connects people across distance. It shapes reality through language and thought. Gemini represents the moment humanity realized that survival depended not only on strength and endurance, but on understanding and connection. This realization transformed societies. Laws formed. Philosophies emerged. Art became symbolic. Communication became survival. Gemini did not replace Taurus. It built upon it. Stability allowed thought. Thought allowed progress. As you imagine this ancient sky, see Gemini not as figures, but as motion between points, lines connecting stars, conversations forming between minds. The land below is secure enough to allow imagination. The sky above reflects that shift. Gemini stands at the threshold between physical and mental worlds, between what is and what could be. It asks not how to survive, but how to understand. And in asking that question, it changes everything that follows. When Gemini finally took human shape, it did so not to simplify meaning, but to make complexity bearable. The idea of duality had already been accepted. Now it needed a face, a story, something the mind could hold without fracturing. Twins offered that structure. Two beings born together, inseparable yet distinct, familiar enough to be comforting, strange enough to be unsettling. Across cultures, the appearance of twins has always carried emotional weight. They challenge the idea of singular identity. They blur boundaries between self and other. In ancient societies, twins were often viewed with reverence or suspicion, sometimes both at once. They felt unnatural not because they were rare, but because they contradicted simplicity. Gemini absorbed this contradiction fully. The twins in the sky were not merely siblings. They were mirrors. Each reflected something the other lacked. Together, they represented wholeness, but only through division. This idea resonated deeply with the human psyche because it echoed an inner truth people rarely spoke aloud. No one is singular. Every human carries opposing impulses, courage and fear, truth and deception, desire to belong and desire to escape. Gemini did not invent this tension. It gave it a name. In early mythologies, twin figures often moved between realms. One lived among gods, the other among humans. One was immortal, the other mortal. One spoke truth, the other mischief. These stories were not random. They expressed a deep psychological awareness that identity is layered and consciousness is never fully unified. The twins became a way to externalize inner conflict. In Greek mythology, Castor and Pollux embodied this perfectly. One was born human, destined to die. The other was divine, immortal. Their bond was so strong that separation became unbearable. When Castor died, Pollux refused eternity without him. Zeus, moved by this devotion, placed them together in the sky. This story was not about heroism. It was about refusal to be whole alone. Gemini, through this myth, became associated with connection as survival. To lose the other was to lose oneself. The fear here is subtle but profound. Isolation threatens identity. This fear explains Gemini's restless energy. Communication becomes essential because silence feels dangerous. Exchange becomes necessary because stagnation feels like erasure. The twins were not warriors or rulers. They were messengers, travelers, intermediaries. They existed in motion, carrying information, bridging gaps, translating meaning. This role reflects a shift in human survival strategies. Once food and shelter were secured, relationships became the next frontier. Trust, alliances, trade, and knowledge exchange determined success. Gemini embodied this evolution, but with communication came deception. Words could clarify or confuse. Stories could unite or divide. Gemini carried this moral ambiguity openly. Ancient cultures were aware of this danger. Trickster twins appear frequently in myth, testing boundaries, exposing hypocrisy, breaking rules. These stories warn listeners not to trust language blindly. Gemini taught that truth is not always singular. This lesson was unsettling. A world with one truth is stable. A world with many truths is fluid. Fluidity allows adaptation, but it also erodes certainty. Gemini stood at this edge. The mirror symbolism deepened this tension. To look at a mirror is to see oneself from the outside. It creates distance between experience and perception. The twins in the sky were like mirrors facing each other endlessly, reflecting without resolution. This endless reflection is why Gemini energy can feel anxious. Thought loops, questions multiply, answers fragment. Yet this same process fuels creativity. Art, philosophy, science, and storytelling all emerge from the ability to see from multiple perspectives. Gemini's gift is multiplicity. In ancient interpretations, this multiplicity was both revered and feared. Knowledge expanded rapidly under Gemini's influence, but so did doubt. Old beliefs weakened. New ideas competed. This competition reshaped societies. Authority shifted from tradition to interpretation. Those who could speak, gained influence. Those who could adapt survived. Gemini became associated with youth not because it was immature, but because it was curious. Curiosity destabilizes hierarchy. It asks questions without regard for consequence. This made Gemini powerful and dangerous. The twins also symbolize the boundary between inner and outer worlds. One twin often represented thought, the other speech. One held ideas, the other released them. Together, they formed communication. This separation mattered. Thinking without expression isolates. Expression without thought misleads. Balance was necessary. Gemini's lesson was not to choose one twin over the other, but to hold both. As astrology evolved, this balance became harder to maintain. Individual interpretation often emphasized one side, intellect over emotion, speed over depth, but the original symbolism remained more nuanced. Gemini was never meant to be shallow. It was meant to be layered. The shadow side of Gemini emerged when division replaced connection, when curiosity turned into distraction, when words lost meaning through overuse. Ancient warnings against gossip, false prophecy, and empty speech often arose during Gemini's season. Silence, too, was valued as a form of wisdom. This dual valuation, speech and silence, sat at the heart of Gemini's mythology. The twins were not always speaking. Sometimes they listened. Sometimes they watched. Observation was as important as expression. In this way, Gemini became associated with awareness. the ability to notice patterns, shifts, inconsistencies. This awareness allowed societies to evolve beyond rigid structures. But awareness without grounding could become instability. Taurus had provided that grounding. Gemini tested it. The zodiac's flow reflects this careful balance. Stability gives way to thought, but thought must not destroy its foundation. As you imagine the ancient sky, picture the twins not as figures frozen in place, but as motion, 2 points in constant relation, always near, never merging, always separate, never alone. They watch humanity with familiar eyes, reflecting questions back rather than answering them. Who are you when no one is listening? Who are you when you speak? Which self is real? Gemini does not resolve these questions. It keeps them alive. And in doing so, it ensures a human consciousness continues to move, adapt, and grow, never settled, never finished, always in dialogue with itself. As the idea of Gemini settled into human imagination, its influence began to move outward from the mind and into the world between people. Duality was no longer only an inner experience. It became social. Once humans understood that reality could be seen from more than one angle, communication became essential. Survival now depended not just on strength or endurance, but on the ability to connect, persuade, explain, and listen. This was the moment when speech became power. Language had existed long before Gemini, but under this phase of the zodiac, it expanded in complexity and importance. Words were no longer used only to warn or command. They were used to negotiate, to trade, to tell stories, to preserve memory. The spoken word became a bridge between minds. Gemini embodied that bridge. In early societies, the exchange of information determined success. Knowing where water could be found, which tribe was friendly, which path was dangerous, these details mattered as much as physical resources. The fastest way to share them was through communication, and the most adaptable people were those who could learn, repeat, and modify what they heard. Gemini reflected this adaptability. Unlike Taurus, which held fast to what was known, Gemini thrived on movement. People began traveling farther during this part of the year. Roads opened, rivers were crossed, markets expanded. Goods moved, but so did ideas. Trade was not just economic, it was cultural. Every exchange carried stories, beliefs, and customs. Gemini's influence could be felt in the mixing of languages, the borrowing of rituals, and the spread of myths across borders. The sky, as always, mirrored this behavior. Gemini did not represent a single destination. It represented the journey between points. Messengers became crucial figures in ancient societies. They were trusted with information that could change outcomes. A delayed message could mean defeat. A misunderstood word could start war. Gemini took on this role symbolically. It became the sign of those who moved between worlds, carrying meaning without owning it. This detachment was important. Messengers were not meant to impose judgment. They were meant to deliver truth as clearly as possible. But clarity was fragile. Words could be bent, misheard, or deliberately altered. Here, Gemini's shadow emerged. The same skills that allowed communication also allowed manipulation. Those who mastered language could influence perception. Stories could be shaped. Truth could be softened or sharpened. Ancient cultures understood this risk. Myths warned of false messengers and deceptive speech. Oaths were sworn carefully. Words carried weight because once spoken, they could not be reclaimed. Gemini held this tension between honesty and cleverness. Writing systems began to develop alongside expanded communication. Symbols replaced memory. Records preserved agreements and histories. This was another Gemini evolution, turning thought into visible form. But writing also froze meaning. Once written, words could outlive their context. Interpretation became necessary. Disagreement followed. Gemini did not resolve these conflicts. It multiplied them. Yet, this multiplication was not failure. It was progress. Debate sharpened ideas. Dialogue refined belief. Civilizations grew more complex as communication expanded. Gemini energy favored curiosity over certainty. Questions became valuable. Exploration was encouraged. Knowledge was no longer static. It traveled. This movement reshaped human identity. People began to see themselves not just as members of tribe, but as participants in a larger network. Identity became flexible. The twins symbolized this flexibility. They were never fixed in one role. They shifted, adapted, responded. This adaptability became essential as societies interacted more frequently. Understanding others required empathy and translation. Gemini's gift was the ability to see from another perspective without losing one's own entirely. But this gift required balance. Without grounding, identity could dissolve. People could become lost in others' expectations or opinions. Ancient philosophy often warned against excessive speech or scattered thought. Silence was valued as a counterbalance. Reflection was necessary to prevent fragmentation. Gemini's season was often associated with learning and teaching. Elders passed down stories. Apprentices observed masters. Knowledge flowed in both directions. This reciprocity mattered. Communication was not one way. It was dialogue. The sky's symbolism reinforced this. The twins faced each other, suggesting exchange rather than dominance. No single voice controlled the narrative. As astrology matured, Gemini became associated with youthfulness. This was not immaturity, but openness, a willingness to learn, to ask, to change. Youth listens. Youth experiments. Youth questions tradition. These qualities were both celebrated and feared. They allowed innovation, but threatened stability. Gemini walked this line carefully. In times of peace, communication flourished. In times of conflict, it became weaponized. Gemini was present in both. Spies, diplomats, storytellers, and scholars all carried Gemini's imprint. They moved unseen, shaping outcomes through words rather than force. This is why Gemini feels light compared to earlier signs. Its power is subtle. It does not push, it persuades. It does not endure, it adapts. Air carries sound farther than muscle carries weight. Yet air can also scatter, distort, and disappear. Without intention, communication becomes noise. Without listening, dialogue becomes monologue. Gemini's lesson was not simply to speak, but to exchange. This exchange extended beyond language. Art, symbols, gestures, and rituals all became forms of communication. Humans learned to express meaning without words. The mind became a landscape as rich as the land itself. As you imagine this ancient phase, picture roads stretching between cities, voices overlapping in markets, stories carried by travelers beneath the same sky. The twins watch over these exchanges, silent but alert. They do not judge what is said. They observe how it moves. Words pass from mouth to ear, from thought to thought, shaping reality as they travel. Gemini does not promise truth. It promises connection. And in that promise, humanity steps beyond isolation, entering a world bound not by land alone, but by understanding. As astrology traveled westward and time continued to reshape belief, the Greeks did not inherit the zodiac so much as reinterpret it. What they received from older civilizations was a framework, divisions of the sky, seasonal markers, symbolic animals. But what they added was narrative. The Greeks could not leave meaning abstract. They needed stories, gods with motives, heroes with flaws, causes that felt human. This is where the zodiac changed forever. Earlier systems treated the heavens as a code to be read, a structure to be respected. Greek thought transformed the sky into a stage. Each sign became not just a symbol, but a memory of divine action. The stars no longer merely marked time. They remembered events. This shift made astrology intimate. Greek mythology did not erase older meanings. It layered over them. The ram of Aries was no longer just sacrifice and renewal. It became the golden ram that carried children to safety. The bull of Taurus was no longer only stability and endurance. It became Zeus himself, transformed by desire. Gemini's duality found expression in the tragic bond between Castor and Pollux. Through these stories, the zodiac gained emotion. The Greeks believed the gods were deeply flawed. They loved, lied, betrayed, and mourned. This belief mattered because it allowed humans to see themselves reflected in the cosmos. The heavens were no longer distant and impersonal. They were familiar, dramatic, and unpredictable. Astrology, under Greek influence, became psychological. Instead of asking only what would happen, people began asking why they felt the way they did. Fate was no longer just external. It lived inside character. Destiny was shaped by temperament, choice, and inner conflict. This is when zodiac signs began to feel personal. Greek philosophers debated whether the stars caused events or merely reflected them. This distinction mattered deeply. If the stars caused behavior, then free will was illusion. If they reflected it, then humans still held agency. Most Greek thinkers leaned toward reflection rather than control. The sky showed tendencies, not commands. It revealed patterns, not absolutes. This subtlety is often lost in modern interpretations, but it was central to Greek astrology. A person born under a sign did not act a certain way because the stars forced them. They acted that way because the same cosmic patterns shaping the world also shaped the soul. This idea bridged science and myth. Greek astronomy advanced alongside astrology. The same thinkers who charted planetary motion also wrote about fate. Precision and poetry existed side by side. This coexistence softened fear. The universe was no longer chaotic. It was ordered, but not cruel. The gods made mistakes. Humans could too. Greek myths tied each zodiac sign to moral lessons. Not instructions, but warnings. The ram's boldness could save or destroy. The bull's strength could nurture or overpower. The twins' connection could enlighten or confuse. Astrology became a mirror for ethics. This moral framing made the zodiac useful beyond agriculture or ritual. It became a tool for self-reflection. By recognizing traits in the stars, people examined those traits within themselves. This was revolutionary. Before this, astrology explained the world. Now it began to explain people. Greek culture valued self-knowledge. Philosophers urged reflection, balance, moderation. Astrology fit naturally into this worldview. It offered a language to discuss temperament without judgment. The zodiac became a map of tendencies rather than a list of outcomes. This approach also allowed astrology to survive skepticism. Even those who doubted divine intervention could accept symbolic meaning. The stars did not need to act. They needed only to reflect. As Greek ideas spread through conquest and trade, this version of astrology traveled with them. The stories changed slightly, but the structure remained. Myth made astrology memorable. Psychology made it relevant. The sky became a shared library of human experience. What is striking is how gentle this transformation was. The Greeks did not replace fear with certainty. They replaced fear with curiosity. Instead of dreading omens, people explored meaning. This shift changed the emotional tone of astrology. It became less about warning and more about understanding. Fate was still present, but it was nuanced. Choices mattered. Character mattered. Awareness mattered. The zodiac, under Greek influence, became a conversation rather than a decree. This conversation continues today. When people speak of zodiac signs as personalities, they are unknowingly echoing Greek thought. They are using myth as metaphor, story as psychology. The Greeks did not intend astrology to define people. They intended it to help people reflect. In this sense, Greek astrology was not predictive. It was interpretive. The stars did not decide who you were. They offered language to describe how you experienced the world. This is why Greek astrology endures. It does not demand belief. It invites contemplation. As you imagine the ancient Greek sky, picture storytellers beneath it, weaving meaning from starlight and memory. The constellations are no longer silent. They speak through myth, through emotion, through shared understanding. The heavens become familiar not because they are controlled, but because they are narrated. And in that narration, humans find a way to see themselves written across the night. Imperfect, curious, conflicted, and endlessly searching for meaning among the stars. When Rome inherited the zodiac, it did not approach it with wonder or philosophical curiosity. Rome approached it with practicality. Power, order, and control shaped every system the empire absorbed, and astrology was no exception. What the Greeks had mythologized, the Romans institutionalized. Astrology became useful. The Roman world was vast, diverse, and unstable beneath the surface. Provinces stretched across continents. Cultures collided. Maintaining unity required more than armies. It required belief systems that could bind people under a shared sense of order. Astrology offered exactly that. The sky was the same everywhere. Whether in Gaul, Egypt, or Syria, the stars rose in familiar patterns. This universality made astrology a perfect imperial language. It transcended local customs while appearing ancient and authoritative. Rome did not need to invent belief. It only needed to standardize it. Roman astrologers organized the zodiac with precision. Signs were aligned with planets, hours, days, and virtues. Time itself became categorized. This structure appealed to Roman sensibilities. Order created stability. Stability reinforced power. But astrology in Rome was not purely symbolic. It was political. Emperors consulted astrologers before campaigns, decrees, and ceremonies. Birth charts were drawn not just for individuals, but for the empire itself. The belief that Rome had a destiny written in the stars became a powerful narrative tool. This belief justified conquest. If the heavens favored Rome, resistance became rebellion against fate. At the same time, astrology was feared. Knowledge of the stars could threaten authority if misused. Predictions about an emperor's death or downfall were dangerous. Astrologers were both valued and monitored. Several emperors banned astrology publicly while practicing it privately. This contradiction reveals Rome's complex relationship with belief. Astrology was too useful to eliminate, but too powerful to leave unchecked. The zodiac became a tool of authority and anxiety. Roman culture valued control, but the future remained uncontrollable. Astrology offered a way to imagine control without achieving it. The stars could be consulted, even if they could not be commanded. This illusion mattered. For ordinary people, astrology offered reassurance. In a vast empire where individual lives felt insignificant, the belief that one's birth aligned with cosmic patterns restored meaning. Identity expanded beyond citizenship into destiny. Roman astrology personalized what Greek astrology had interpreted. Horoscope readings became common. Individuals sought insight into character, fortune, and fate. This shift marked a significant evolution. Astrology moved fully into the personal sphere. Yet this personalization occurred within rigid social structures. Birth charts did not promise equality. They often reinforced hierarchy. Nobility was associated with favorable signs. Slaves were believed to be born under harsher influences. Astrology mirrored society rather than challenging it. This mirroring reinforced a belief that social order was natural. If the stars supported hierarchy, then hierarchy was inevitable. Astrology became a quiet form of social reinforcement. At the same time, Roman syncretism blended astrology with local traditions. Egyptian, Babylonian, and Greek elements merged into a single system. The zodiac became more elaborate, not simpler. This complexity increased its authority. The more intricate the system, the more impressive it appeared. Few could understand it fully, which made those who claimed expertise powerful. Roman astrologers gained status. Their words could calm fear or incite panic. Their charts could influence decisions that shaped lives. This power created suspicion. Astrologers were sometimes exiled or executed for predicting imperial downfall. Knowledge of the stars was never neutral. Astrology in Rome existed in tension between fascination and fear. The empire also spread astrology through infrastructure. Roads carried not just armies, but ideas. Astrology traveled alongside law, language, and governance. It became part of daily life across regions. The zodiac entered homes, marketplaces, and temples. Symbols appeared in mosaics, coins, and art. The sky's order became visible everywhere. This visibility normalized belief. Even as Christianity began to rise, astrology remained embedded in Roman thought. Early Christian leaders struggled with it, not because it was false, but because it was persuasive. Astrology offered meaning without scripture. This competition forced adaptation. Astrology did not disappear. It transformed. Roman astrology's greatest legacy was endurance. By systematizing and spreading the zodiac, Rome ensured its survival beyond empire. When Rome fell, astrology remained. The sky outlasted authority. As you imagine this era, picture astrologers whispering in marble halls, citizens glancing at charts, emperors quietly fearing omens. The stars hang above it all, unchanged. Astrology, once a survival tool, then a philosophical mirror, now becomes a language of power. And even as empires crumble, that language continues to be spoken, softly, persistently, beneath the same eternal sky. As the Roman world slowly transformed, belief itself entered a period of tension. Old gods faded. New religions rose. Empires shifted their spiritual centers. And with each shift came a question that astrology could not avoid. Could the stars still matter in a universe ruled by a single god? Or would belief in the heavens be cast aside as superstition? Astrology did not disappear. It adapted. In the early centuries of Christianity, the stars became controversial rather than irrelevant. The problem was not that astrology existed, but that it competed. If destiny was written in the sky, where the divine will end and human responsibility begin, if birth determined fate, what place was left for repentance, choice, or grace? Church scholars argued intensely over this. Some rejected astrology outright, calling it dangerous. Others quietly absorbed parts of it, reframing the stars as signs rather than causes. The heavens, they said, could reflect God's order without controlling human souls. This compromise allowed astrology to survive. Rather than ruling destiny, the stars were recast as indicators of mood, season, and inclination. They influenced the body, not the spirit. This distinction mattered deeply. It allowed belief in cosmic order without undermining moral responsibility. Astrology slipped into the background, tolerated but restrained. In monasteries, scholars continued to study astronomy for practical reasons. Calendars depended on accurate observation. Religious festivals followed celestial cycles. Easter itself was calculated using lunar movement. The sky remained essential. Once again, astrology hid inside necessity. Islamic civilization, rising alongside and beyond the remnants of Rome, treated astrology differently. Rather than rejecting it, Islamic scholars preserved and refined it. They translated Greek and Roman texts, expanded mathematical astronomy, and explored celestial mechanics with precision. For them, studying the heavens was an act of reverence. Understanding creation honored the Creator. Astrology flourished in courts and centers of learning. Physicians used it to time treatments. Scholars debated its limits. The zodiac remained, but interpretation became more cautious, more intellectual. This preservation was critical. Without it, much of ancient astrological knowledge would have been lost. As Islamic scholarship later entered medieval Europe through translation, astrology returned transformed. It arrived not as myth, but as system. Charts, calculations, and correspondences replaced story. Astrology became academic. Universities taught alongside medicine and philosophy. Kings consulted astrologers openly. The zodiac re-entered authority under a new guise, science. But this balance was fragile. As the scientific revolution emerged, astrology faced its greatest challenge yet. Observation became experimentation. Prediction demanded proof. The heavens were no longer divine messages, but physical bodies obeying laws. This shift changed everything. Planets moved because of gravity, not intention. Stars burned without awareness. The sky lost its voice. Astrology was pushed aside, labeled unscientific, irrational, outdated. Astronomy split from it completely, leaving astrology without institutional protection. And yet, astrology survived again. It survived not in laboratories, but in private thought, in quiet belief, in personal meaning. When science explained how the universe worked, astrology offered comfort about what it meant. This distinction saved it. Astrology retreated from authority and entered intimacy. It stopped claiming power over events and focused on reflection. The zodiac became symbolic rather than predictive. In times of uncertainty, people returned to it not for answers, but for reassurance. Patterns soothe the anxious mind. Cycles comfort those overwhelmed by randomness. Even as skepticism grew, astrology remained emotionally useful. During periods of upheaval, wars, plagues, revolutions, belief in cosmic order resurfaced. When human systems failed, the stars still moved predictably. That predictability offered calm. Astrology no longer competed with science. It occupied a different space entirely. By the modern era, the zodiac had transformed again. It became part of popular culture. Horoscopes appeared in newspapers. Signs were discussed casually, playfully, without fear. This trivialization seemed to weaken astrology, but it actually protected it. By becoming entertainment, it avoided persecution. By becoming symbolic, it avoided falsification. Astrology learned how to survive by softening its claims. What endured was not belief in fate, but fascination with pattern. Humans still wanted to see themselves reflected in the cosmos, even if they no longer believed the cosmos controlled them. This desire is deeply psychological. Identity feels less fragile when connected to something larger. Meaning feels safer when shared with the universe. The zodiac offered that connection without demanding obedience. Through religion and science, astrology changed its voice but never fell silent. It whispered when it could no longer speak. It stopped commanding and began suggesting. As you imagine these centuries passing, picture sky unchanged above shifting beliefs. Temples replaced by churches. Churches challenged by laboratories. Empires collapsing into nations. The stars remain. Astrology does not need to be true to be powerful. It needs only to feel meaningful. And meaning is not measured in experiments. It is felt in moments of uncertainty. This is why astrology survives every intellectual revolution. It adapts to whatever space is left to it. When gods ruled, it served gods. When kings ruled, it served kings. When science ruled, it served the individual. The zodiac learned patience. It waited for moments when humans needed pattern more than proof. And even now, beneath modern skies lit by artificial light, the old signs remain quietly present, not as rulers of fate, but as reminders that humans have always searched for themselves in the stars, and perhaps always will. As astrology slipped fully into the modern age, something subtle but profound happened. The zodiac stopped being about the sky and started being about the self. No longer a system meant to explain seasons, kings, or empires. It became a quiet language people used to describe their inner lives. This transformation did not happen suddenly. It unfolded slowly, shaped by changing ideas about identity, psychology, and meaning. For most of human history, identity was collective. A person belonged to a family, a village, a class, a role. Individual personality mattered far less than duty and survival. But as societies modernized, the focus shifted inward. People began asking different questions. Who am I apart from my role? Why do I feel this way? What makes me different? Astrology adapted to these questions effortlessly. The zodiac offered a ready-made vocabulary for self-exploration. Instead of explaining floods or wars, it explained moods, desires, strengths, and fears. It did not require faith in gods or cosmic forces. It only required curiosity about oneself. This made astrology deeply personal. Birth charts became mirrors rather than maps. People no longer asked what would happen to them, but what kind of person they were. The stars did not predict events. They described tendencies. Personality replaced prophecy. This shift aligned perfectly with the rise of psychology. As Freud and later thinkers explored the unconscious, astrology offered a parallel system, less clinical, more poetic. Where psychology analyzed, astrology narrated. Where psychology diagnosed, astrology described. Both systems sought meaning beneath behavior. Astrology's appeal lay in its gentleness. It did not label people as broken. It framed traits as natural expressions of cosmic pattern. Anger became fire. Sensitivity became water. Restlessness became air. Practicality became earth. In this framing, flaws were reframed as imbalances rather than failures. This reframing mattered. It offered comfort without confrontation. People could recognize themselves in their signs without feeling judged. The zodiac became a safe space for self-recognition. The modern horoscope, brief and generalized, may seem superficial, but its emotional function is powerful. It invites reflection. It asks the reader to pause and consider their inner state. Even when taken lightly, it encourages self-awareness. This is why astrology thrives in moments of uncertainty. When identity feels unstable, people reach for symbols that promise coherence. The zodiac offers a structure that feels ancient and reassuring, even when its modern use is casual. Astrology also adapted to modern diversity of identity. Unlike rigid systems, it allows contradiction. A person can be ambitious and sensitive, logical and emotional, confident and anxious. Birth charts contain complexity, not certainty. This flexibility makes astrology resilient. It bends rather than breaks. As individualism increased, astrology shifted focus from sun signs to entire charts. Rising signs, moon signs, planetary placements, layers of interpretation mirrored the layered nature of modern identity. No one was defined by a single trait anymore. This depth appealed to those seeking more than surface-level understanding. Astrology became introspective rather than authoritative. It stopped telling people what they must do and started offering language for how they feel. This change is crucial to understanding its survival. In earlier eras, astrology claimed power over fate. In the modern era, it claims empathy. It listens rather than commands. People often say they do not believe in astrology, yet still find themselves drawn to its descriptions. This contradiction reveals something important. Astrology no longer requires belief. It functions symbolically. Symbols do not demand proof. They offer resonance. When someone reads a description and thinks, "That feels like me," astrology has done its work. Accuracy is emotional, not empirical. This emotional accuracy is why astrology integrates so easily into modern life. It appears in conversations, relationships, and self-reflection. It becomes shorthand for personality, a way to communicate boundaries and tendencies without explanation. Saying, "I'm a Taurus," becomes a way of saying, "I value stability," without having to justify it. This shorthand builds connection. Shared language creates intimacy. Astrology offers a common framework for discussing differences gently. In relationships, astrology often serves as a tool for empathy. Instead of blaming behavior, people attribute it to temperament. This does not excuse harm, but it can soften misunderstanding. The zodiac becomes a lens rather than a verdict. Astrology also thrives because it does not require expertise. Anyone can participate. Charts can be simple or complex, depending on interest. This accessibility democratizes meaning. Unlike religion, astrology does not demand obedience. Unlike science, it does not demand rigor. It invites curiosity without consequence. This invitation is powerful. In times of anxiety, people seek patterns. Randomness is unsettling. The zodiac offers rhythm. 12 signs, cycles repeating, order without enforcement. Even skeptics find comfort in cycles. Astrology also benefits from modern technology. Apps generate charts instantly. Social media spreads interpretations rapidly. Astrology adapts to language trends, humor, and self-expression. Memes turn ancient symbols into modern reflections. This playfulness does not weaken astrology, it refreshes it. It keeps it alive in contemporary consciousness. What remains constant is the desire to feel seen. Astrology offers that feeling. It suggests that personal experience fits into a larger pattern, that emotions are not isolated, but shared across time and culture. This sense of belonging is subtle but profound. Critics often argue that astrology is vague or self-confirming, but this critique misunderstands its function. Astrology does not aim to predict external reality. It aims to interpret internal experience. In this role, precision matters less than resonance. Astrology survives because it adapts to the psychological needs of each era. In the modern world, those needs center on identity, meaning, and connection. The zodiac meets those needs quietly. It does not insist. It suggests. It does not define. It reflects. As you consider this transformation, imagine the stars no longer as distant rulers, but as companions. They do not command your path. They walk beside your thoughts. The sky becomes less about fate and more about language. Astrology becomes a way to tell your own story using ancient symbols. A story that acknowledges contradiction, change, and growth. This is why astrology endures even when belief fades. It speaks to the parts of the human mind that logic does not reach. It offers meaning without demand, pattern without pressure, reflection without judgment. In a world that moves quickly and changes constantly, astrology remains slow, cyclical, familiar. It reminds people that identity is not fixed, but unfolding, that traits are tendencies, not prisons. That self-understanding is a process, not a conclusion. The zodiac, once a tool for survival, then power, then belief, has become something quieter, a mirror. And in that mirror, generation after generation continues to look, not for destiny, but for themselves. In the modern world, Aries, Taurus, and Gemini exist in a strange dual state. They are ancient symbols carrying thousands of years of meaning. At the same time, they are casual words used in everyday conversation. People speak them lightly, almost playfully, yet the emotional reactions they trigger are often serious. There is recognition, agreement, resistance, even relief. Something about these signs still reaches beneath logic. Aries is now often described as bold, impulsive, passionate, sometimes aggressive. Taurus is steady, loyal, stubborn, comfort-loving. Gemini is curious, talkative, adaptable, inconsistent. These descriptions circulate widely, repeated so often that they feel obvious. But beneath these modern traits lies the deep history that shaped them, history that still quietly influences how they are felt. Aries, in the modern mind, is associated with initiative. People speak of Aries energy when they want to begin something new, confront a challenge, or push forward without hesitation. This reflects its ancient origin almost perfectly. Aries has always represented the moment when waiting ends and action becomes unavoidable. What has changed is context. The danger is no longer starvation or failed crops. It is emotional stagnation, fear of failure, hesitation. Aries now symbolizes the courage to act internally rather than physically. Modern Aries traits often emphasize leadership, but this leadership is rarely about control. It is about movement, about being the one who steps forward when others hesitate. This echoes the ancient fear embedded in Aries. Waiting too long could be worse than acting too soon. Aries energy today is often admired and criticized simultaneously. It is praised for confidence and criticized for impatience. This dual reaction reflects its original role. Action is necessary but risky. Courage inspires, but it also disrupts. Taurus, by contrast, represents what comes after decision. In modern interpretations, Taurus is associated with comfort, routine, loyalty, and resistance to change. It is often described as stubborn, slow, or overly attached. But this description misses the deeper reason behind these traits. Taurus is about protection. In ancient times, Taurus guarded what had already been achieved. Modern Taurus energy does the same, but in emotional and psychological terms. It values stability because instability threatens security. It resists change not out of fear, but out of awareness of what change costs. People with strong Taurus traits are often drawn creating safe environments, homes, routines, relationships that feel reliable. This is not laziness. It is preservation. It is the instinct to hold on to what sustains life. Modern society often rewards speed, novelty, and constant change. In this environment, Taurus can feel out of place. Its values appear outdated. But this tension reveals something important. Taurus represents a counterbalance to burnout. The ancient bull did not rush. Neither does modern Taurus energy. It asks a quiet question: is this change necessary, or are we moving simply because movement is expected? This question is deeply relevant today. Gemini, perhaps more than the other two, has undergone the most visible transformation. Modern Gemini is associated with communication, curiosity, multitasking, humor, and unpredictability. It is often labeled inconsistent or scattered. Yet this interpretation only scratches the surface. Gemini represents perception itself. In an age defined by information, Gemini energy feels amplified. Messages arrive constantly. Opinions clash. Identities shift. Gemini thrives in this environment because it is built for navigation rather than stability. Modern Gemini is less about duality and more about multiplicity. It does not choose between two identities. It explores many. This can feel chaotic to others, but reflects a reality of modern life. The ancient twins symbolize two perspectives. Today, Gemini symbolizes countless perspectives. The core remains the same. Reality is not singular. This can create tension. In a world that demands clear answers and fixed identities, Gemini's openness can be unsettling. It questions certainty. It disrupts rigid narratives. But this disruption is also necessary. Without it, societies stagnate. Gemini introduces dialogue, debate, and adaptation. Modern Gemini energy often appears in people who connect ideas, translate concepts, and move between worlds, cultural, intellectual, or social. They are bridges, much like their ancient predecessors. What connects Aries, Taurus, and Gemini in the modern mind is sequence. Aries begins. Taurus stabilizes. Gemini connects. This progression mirrors not just seasons, but psychological development. Aries corresponds to impulse, the moment of desire. Taurus corresponds to commitment, the decision to stay. Gemini corresponds to understanding, the need to explain, share, and adapt. These stages repeat constantly in human life. Starting a relationship, building trust, communicating differences, beginning a project, sustaining effort, sharing results. The zodiac, stripped of superstition, becomes a pattern of experience. Modern astrology resonates because it maps these patterns onto personality. People recognize themselves not because the stars dictate behavior, but because the patterns are universal. Critics often argue that astrology is vague, but vagueness is part of its strength. It allows people to project their experience onto the symbol. This projection creates meaning. Meaning does not need precision to be powerful. In therapy, in art, in storytelling, metaphor is used for the same reason. It bypasses resistance. Astrology functions similarly. The continued popularity of these three signs reflects their foundational role. They represent beginning, sustaining, and connecting, three essential human processes. In relationships, Aries energy brings passion. Taurus brings loyalty. Gemini brings conversation. When balanced, they create harmony. When unbalanced, they create conflict. This framework helps people articulate dynamics they feel but struggle to name. Astrology becomes a language for emotional literacy. This is why people often return to it during transitions. New jobs, new relationships, identity shifts, times when old narratives no longer fit. Astrology does not provide answers. It provides context. In the modern world, where meaning is often fragmented, this context matters. The zodiac's endurance lies in its adaptability. Aries, Taurus, and Gemini have shifted from survival markers to psychological archetypes. They now describe inner landscapes rather than external events. This transformation does not weaken them. It deepens them. As you consider these signs today, imagine them not as labels, but as currents, energies that move through experience, shaping how people begin, endure, and connect. The stars no longer need to control fate. Their symbols live inside human behavior. And as long as humans continue to act, protect, and communicate, Aries, Taurus, and Gemini will remain relevant. Not because they predict the future, but because they describe the present, quietly, persistently, endlessly. As these ancient symbols continue to live inside modern thought, their presence begins to feel less like belief and more like habit. Aries, Taurus, and Gemini are no longer consulted with reverence or fear. They are referenced casually, almost subconsciously, woven into language, humor, and identity. Yet the ease with which people speak about them hides something deeper. These signs endure because they still describe how it feels to be human. Aries lives in the moment of inner ignition, that instant when a thought becomes a decision, when hesitation collapses into movement. In modern life, this moment is rarely physical. It is emotional, creative, psychological. Choosing to leave something familiar, choosing to speak up, choosing to begin again after failure. Aries represents that internal spark that says, now. This spark is often misunderstood. In a culture that values planning and caution, Aries energy can feel reckless. But without it, nothing begins. Modern burnout often comes not from doing too much, but from never starting what matters. Aries pushes against that paralysis. People drawn to Aries symbolism often feel this tension. They are driven by an internal urgency that does not always make sense to others. They act because waiting feels unbearable. This is not impulsivity for its own sake. It is a response to stagnation. Taurus, in contrast, speaks to what happens after the excitement fades, after the choice is made, after the initial rush settles into routine. Modern life rarely celebrates this phase. Maintenance is invisible. Stability is taken for granted. But without Taurus energy, nothing lasts. Taurus in the modern world is often framed as comfort-seeking, indulgent, or resistant to change. Yet this framing overlooks its deeper role. Taurus is about embodiment, about inhabiting the present fully, about recognizing that growth requires nourishment. In an era of constant distraction, Taurus reminds people to slow down, to rest, to protect their energy. This is not weakness. It is sustainability. People with strong Taurus tendencies often struggle in cultures that reward constant productivity. Their instinct to pause, to build slowly, to stay grounded can feel out of sync. But these instincts are precisely what prevent collapse. Taurus asks a difficult question. Once you're started, can you stay? Gemini then enters as the force that keeps experience from becoming isolated. Modern life is defined by connection. Messages, networks, ideas moving faster than ever before. Gemini energy feels omnipresent because the world itself has become Gemini-like. This does not mean Gemini is shallow. It means it is responsive. It listens, adapts, translates. Gemini energy allows people to navigate complexity without demanding resolution. In modern psychology, this resembles cognitive flexibility, the ability to hold multiple perspectives without anxiety. Gemini embodies this skill symbolically. However, flexibility can become fragmentation. Too many inputs, too many opinions, too much movement. Gemini's challenge is not curiosity, but coherence. People who resonate with Gemini often feel mentally overstimulated. Their minds move quickly, drawing connections others miss. But without grounding, this movement can lead to restlessness or indecision. This is where the sequence of the zodiac matters. Gemini is not meant to exist without Taurus beneath it. Thought needs grounding. Communication needs presence. Without stability, connection becomes noise. Aries begins. Taurus sustains. Gemini connects. This pattern appears everywhere. In creative work, Aries sparks inspiration. Taurus develops skill. Gemini shares a result. In relationships, Aries initiates attraction. Taurus builds trust. Gemini maintains dialogue. The zodiac persists because it reflects processes people live through repeatedly. Modern astrology often removes this sequence, focusing on isolated traits. But the deeper resonance comes from flow, understanding how energies interact, not just how they exist. This interaction explains why people rarely identify with only one sign. They experience different energies at different times. A person may need Aries courage one moment, Taurus patience the next, Gemini adaptability after that. Astrology survives because it allows for movement rather than fixed identity. This flexibility is crucial in a world where identity itself is fluid. Careers change. Relationships evolve. Beliefs shift. Astrology accommodates this without demanding consistency. It does not say, you are this forever. It says, this energy is present now. That distinction is subtle but powerful. In moments of crisis, people often return to astrology not for prediction, but for grounding. Reading about a sign becomes a way to organize emotion, to name feelings that feel overwhelming. This naming reduces anxiety. What is named feels less chaotic. Aries names urgency. Taurus names attachment. Gemini names confusion. Once named, these states feel manageable. Astrology becomes a language for inner weather. This is why it thrives during uncertainty. Economic instability, social change, person transition, all increase the desire for frameworks that make sense of experience. Astrology does not solve problems. It contextualizes them. Critics may argue that this is illusion, but illusion can still soothe. Stories have always helped humans endure uncertainty. The zodiac is one such story. Aries, Taurus, and Gemini endure because they speak to fundamental human rhythms. The need to act, the need to preserve, the need to connect. These needs do not disappear with progress. They become more complex. Modern life amplifies Gemini's speed, challenges Taurus's patience, and demands Aries' courage in quieter, more internal ways. The ancient sky still reflects this tension. When people say astrology feels accurate, They are often responding to recognition rather than belief. They recognize themselves in the patterns. Recognition creates meaning. Meaning does not require literal truth to function. This is why astrology exists comfortably alongside skepticism. It does not demand agreement. It offers metaphor. As long as humans seek metaphor to understand themselves, astrology will remain relevant. Aries, Taurus, and Gemini are not instructions. They are reflections. They remind people the beginning is hard, staying is harder, and understanding is endless. They remind people that identity is not a destination, but a process moving through cycles. And perhaps that is why these signs feel especially alive today. In a world constantly asking people to redefine themselves, the zodiac offers a reminder that change is not failure. It is movement. The stars no longer dictate fate, but their symbols still describe the way humans move through life. Quietly, repeatedly, and with more recognition than belief. As the night deepens and thoughts slow, these patterns continue their silent rotation, not as rulers of destiny, but as companions to reflection. Aries whispers, begin. Taurus murmurs, stay. Gemini wonders, connect. And in that gentle sequence, human experience continues, unchanged in its essence, even as the world transforms around it. There comes a point, often late at night or during moments of quiet exhaustion, when the world feels overwhelming in a way that logic cannot solve. News moves too fast. Expectations pile up. Decisions feel endless. In those moments, people do not usually reach for facts. They reach for patterns. Something steady. Something familiar enough to lean on without effort. This is where astrology has always waited. The comfort of patterns is not a modern weakness. It is one of the oldest human instincts. Long before language, before writing, before cities, the human brain learned to survive by recognizing repetition. The rustle that comes before danger. The cycle of day and night. The return of seasons. Pattern meant safety. Randomness meant threat. Astrology grew directly from this instinct. When early humans looked at the sky, they were not searching for meaning in the abstract sense. They were searching for reassurance. The stars returned. The moon changed predictably. Even when life on Earth felt violent and uncertain, the sky followed rules. This contrast mattered deeply. It suggested that chaos might be temporary, but order was eternal. That feeling has never disappeared. Modern life may look different on the surface, but emotionally it often feels just as unstable. Careers shift, relationships end, identities evolve. Technology accelerates everything, leaving little time to process change. The human nervous system has not adapted as quickly as society has, so people still seek patterns. Astrology offers one of the gentlest forms of pattern recognition available. It does not demand belief or obedience. It does not require action. It simply presents a structure and invites the mind to rest inside it. 12 signs, cycles that repeat, archetypes that feel familiar. This simplicity is soothing. When life feels chaotic, the idea that experiences unfold in cycles can feel grounding. If something is part of a cycle, it will pass. If emotions follow patterns, they are not permanent. Astrology quietly reinforces this perspective without needing to argue for it. The zodiac does not say, this will happen forever. It says, this happens again and again. There is comfort in repetition. In psychology, this is known as containment. The mind relaxes when experiences are held within a framework. Astrology provides that container. It gives emotions a place to sit. Fear becomes an Aries moment. Attachment becomes Taurus. Confusion becomes Gemini. These labels do not solve anything, but they soften the edges. They make experience feel shared rather than isolating. This shared feeling is powerful. Astrology connects people across time. When someone reads about a sign, they are engaging with symbols that humans have recognized for thousands of years. This creates a sense of continuity. Others have felt this before. Others have named it. Others have survived it. That knowledge calms the nervous system. In a chaotic world, isolation intensifies anxiety. Pattern reduces it. This is why astrology often resurfaces during periods of collective uncertainty. Economic instability, social upheaval, global crises. These moments strip away the illusion of control. When external systems fail, internal frameworks become essential. Astrology does not restore control. It restores orientation. It says, you are here in the cycle. This phase feels like this. It will move. Even skepticism does not fully break discomfort. Many people who claim not to believe in astrology still read it, still recognize themselves in it, still feel something soften when they encounter familiar descriptions. This is because astrology operates on an emotional level, not an intellectual one. The mind does not need astrology to be true. It needs it to be familiar. Familiarity breeds safety. In a world where novelty is constant, familiarity becomes rare. Astrology offers repetition. In a culture obsessed with change, the same signs, the same cycles, the same language, repeated year after year. This repetition slows the mind. There is also something deeply comforting about the idea that personal struggles are not random. Even if one does not believe the stars cause events, the metaphor of alignment provides relief. Feeling out of sync becomes temporary misalignment rather than personal failure. This shift in framing reduces shame. Astrology does not ask, what is wrong with you? It asks, where are you in the cycle? That question invites patience rather than judgment. The ZODIAC also allows people to externalize emotion without denying responsibility. Saying this feels like a Gemini moment does not remove accountability. It creates distance, enough space to observe rather than react. This observational distance is calming. In meditation and therapy, similar techniques are used. Naming emotions, watching thoughts pass. Astrology offers a culturally familiar version of this practice. It turns inner chaos into something observable. There is also comfort in limitation. 12 signs, finite categories. In a world of infinite options, limitation can feel restful. You do not need to understand everything. You only need to recognize where you are. Astrology reduces complexity without erasing it. It allows people to feel understood without being fully exposed. A sign can describe you without revealing everything. This partial recognition feels safe. Safety is essential for rest. This is why astrology fits so naturally into nighttime rituals. Reading horoscopes before sleep, listening to astrological storytelling, letting symbols drift through the mind as consciousness slows. The brain, tired from decision-making, welcomes structure that does not demand response. Astrology is passive. It does not require action. It does not insist on change. It simply exists. In this way, it resembles the sky itself, present, predictable, unmoving in its rhythm. The comfort comes not from answers, but from continuity. Chaos feels frightening because it feels endless. Patterns reassure because they imply boundaries. If something has a beginning, it also has an end. Astrology reinforces this quietly. Seasons change. Signs rotate. Nothing stays in one phase forever. This truth is deeply soothing. Even grief fits into this framework. Loss becomes part of a cycle rather than a permanent state. Pain is not erased, but it is contextualized. Astrology does not deny suffering. It places it. In placing suffering within a larger rhythm, it becomes bearable. This is why astrology survives criticism. Its value is not in accuracy, but in function. It helps people regulate emotion. It helps people make sense of experience without demanding explanation. Modern culture often demands justification for rest, emotion, and uncertainty. Astrology allows these states without justification. It legitimizes them symbolically. Feeling lost becomes part of Gemini. Needing comfort becomes Taurus. Wanting change becomes Aries. None of these states are wrong. They are phases. This framing encourages self-compassion. The zodiac does not punish. It does not shame. It does not command. It describes. Description without judgment is rare and precious. This is especially important in a culture that constantly measures, evaluates, and compares. Astrology steps outside competition. One sign is not better than another. Each has a place. This equality is comforting. No matter where you are in the cycle, you belong to it. As the world grows louder and faster, the need for quiet structure increases. Astrology offers structure without noise, pattern without pressure. It does not interrupt. It waits. When the mind is tired, waiting matters. The comfort of astrology lies in its refusal to rush. The stars do not hurry. The signs do not compete. The cycle continues regardless of human urgency. This steadiness invites rest. As thoughts slow, patterns become visible again. The mind remembers that experience moves in waves, not straight lines. Astrology reminds people that it is acceptable to ebb. In that reminder, anxiety softens. The zodiac does not promise certainty. It promises rhythm, and rhythm is often enough. As you sit with these ideas, perhaps late at night, perhaps half asleep, notice how the mind relaxes when it stops trying to solve everything, when it allows patterns to hold experience instead. The world does not become simpler, but it becomes quieter. The stars do not explain life. They accompany it. And in a chaotic world, accompaniment can feel like peace. There's a quiet misunderstanding that follows astrology wherever it goes. The idea that the zodiac is meant to tell people where to go, what to do, who to become, that it functions like a map, precise and directive, laying out a path that must be followed. This belief has persisted for centuries, often reinforced by those who sought authority through the stars. But beneath all layers of interpretation, astrology has always served a different purpose. It has never been a map. It has been a mirror. A map tells you where you are headed. A mirror shows you where you are standing. The zodiac does not move you forward. It reflects you back to yourself. This distinction matters, especially in a world that constantly demands direction. People are expected to plan, optimize, and predict. Every decision is framed as a step toward a future outcome. In such an environment, the pressure to know where one is going can become exhausting. Astrology, at its most honest, does not add to that pressure. It releases it. When you look into the zodiac, you are not being instructed. You are being seen. This is why astrology feels personal even when it is generalized. It does not define action. It reflects experience. The emotions you recognize in a sign are already present within you. The zodiac simply gives them shape. A mirror does not create your face. It reveals it. For much of history, humans lived without the expectation of total control. The future was uncertain by default. People did not measure success by prediction, but by endurance. Astrology fit naturally into this worldview because it mirrored cycles rather than dictating outcomes. Only when societies became obsessed with control did astrology begin to be mistaken for a guidebook. In reality, the zodiac has always described how life feels, not how it should unfold. Aries reflects urgency, the feeling that something must begin now. Taurus reflects attachment, the desire to hold on to what feels safe. Gemini reflects movement of thought, the restlessness of a mind seeking understanding. These are not instructions. They are states of being. They arise whether or not one believes in astrology. The zodiac survives because it names these states without judgment. It does not say urgency is good or bad. It does not say attachment is right or wrong. It does not say restlessness is success or failure. It simply reflects them as part of a larger pattern. This reflection creates distance. Distance allows observation. Observation allows calm. When emotions feel overwhelming, seeing them mirrored outside the self reduces their intensity. They become something that can be noticed rather than something that must be acted upon. Astrology offers a separation gently, without analysis or confrontation. This is why astrology feels restful rather than demanding. A map requires attention. A mirror invites stillness. The zodiac does not ask you to move. It asks you to look. In moments of confusion, people often seek answers. But answers create pressure. They imply responsibility. Reflection, by contrast, creates space. It allows the mind to breathe. Astrology offers reflection in symbolic form. Symbols are powerful because they bypass logic. They speak directly to intuition. When someone recognizes themselves in a symbol, understanding arrives without effort. This understanding is not directive. It is acknowledging. There is relief in being acknowledged without being instructed. Modern life rarely offers this. People are constantly evaluated, told how to improve, how to change, how to become better versions of themselves. Even rest is often framed as productivity. Astrology stands apart from this language. It does not demand improvement. It accepts presence. A mirror does not ask you to be different. It shows you as you are. This is why astrology often appears during moments of pause, late at night, during transitions, in times of uncertainty, when action feels premature and understanding feels more urgent. Astrology fills that space. It does not push. It holds. The zodiac also reflects the truth that identity is not fixed. A mirror does not capture a permanent image. It changes with movement, light, angle. Astrology reflects this fluidity. People experience different energies at different times. One day feels like Aries. Another feels like Taurus. Another feels like Gemini. None of these states invalidate the others. They coexist. This coexistence challenges the idea that identity must be singular and consistent. Astrology suggests that identity is cyclical, responsive, contextual. This perspective is deeply calming. If identity is a process rather than a destination, there is less pressure to arrive, less urgency to define oneself permanently. The zodiac normalizes change by embedding it within a larger rhythm. Change becomes expected rather than threatening. This is one of astrology's quiet gifts. The mirror metaphor also explains why astrology does not require belief to function. A mirror works whether or not you trust it. It reflects regardless of interpretation. People may disagree about astrology's truth, but many still recognize themselves in its symbols. This recognition does not require faith. It requires honesty. Astrology does not persuade. It resonates. Resonance cannot be forced. It either happens or does not. When it does, the experience is subtle, a feeling of being understood without explanation, of being named without exposure, of being reflected without distortion. This feeling is rare. Most systems either analyze or judge. Astrology simply mirrors. Even its inaccuracies serve this function. When a description does not resonate, the mind notices the difference. This contrast clarifies self-understanding. One learns as much from what does not fit as from what does. The mirror shows edges as well as features. In this way, astrology supports self-awareness without instruction. The zodiac also mirrors collective experience. Cultural moods often align with astrological language. Periods of rapid change feel like Gemini. Periods of conflict feel like Aries. Periods of consolidation feel like Taurus. These associations help people contextualize collective emotion. They offer a shared vocabulary for naming what is otherwise abstract. This shared language fosters connection. Connection reduces isolation. Isolation amplifies anxiety. Astrology, by offering common symbols, creates a sense of belonging. Even when interpreted individually, the zodiac is experienced collectively. Millions of people read the same signs, reflect on the same archetypes, feel recognized by the same language. This shared reflection is comforting. It reminds people that their experiences are not unique failures, but common human patterns. The mirror reflects not just the individual, but humanity. This is why astrology persists across cultures and eras. It adapts its language, but not its function. It remains a reflective surface for human experience. When people attempt to use astrology as a map, disappointment often follows. Predictions fail. Expectations collapse. But when astrology is allowed to be what has always been, a mirror, it fulfills its purpose. It reflects without controlling. It illuminates without directing. It accompanies without demanding. As the night deepens and the mind grows quieter, this reflective quality becomes more apparent. The zodiac does not interrupt thought. It settles into it. Symbols drift through awareness like reflections on water, recognizable, but not demanding focus. The mirror does not speak loudly. It waits. This waiting is important. In a culture that constantly urges movement, waiting feels radical. Astrology invites waiting without guilt. It suggests that understanding can come without action. That awareness itself is valuable. That being is enough. When viewed this way, the zodiac becomes less about destiny and more about presence, less about future and more about now. It does not say who you will become. It shows who you are experiencing yourself as in this moment. And that reflection, quiet and unforced, can be deeply calming. The stars do not tell you where to go. They show you where you are. And sometimes, especially when the world feels loud and demanding, that is all you need. A mirror, a moment, a pause beneath the sky that has always been there, reflecting humanity back to itself without expectation, without urgency, without judgment, just presence.